Hello, everybody, and welcome to another creator commentary for UTC. This time we're talking about Chapter 10, Class Warfare. This is the sixth and final chapter in Phase 2, which I began producing back in November 2011. The final pages were finished on the final weekend of May, and May 2015 this year. And I am sitting down and just going to run through the entire issue. And there's a lot to talk about for this one. A lot. As with the previous Phase 1 finale, Day of the Dork, there was a lot of things that I was trying to pull together and conclude. And that story was very long. It was the largest story in UTC, 30 pages. And a lot of things happened during the writing of Class Warfare and during my production of the first half of the issue when things were still kind of trying to get changed around and stuff. So there was so many things to manage in this issue. I think it really came out very well. Unlike I had a lot of similar problems in Chapter 6, Big World, and I talked about it extensively in that commentary, and I won't repeat a lot of what I was saying in that one, but the gist of it was I planned to do too much in too little space. And the same problem was happening with Chapter 10 here. And they're both 22-page issues. I really wanted to keep to that industry standard for all of Phase 2. And the consequence would have been, when I collect all these into a trade paperback, it would have been so big of a volume that the cost would have been prohibitive to pretty much anybody who would have an inclination to buy it. So I was trying to release, okay, I make 6 chapters for this. That's 22 pages each, and that's a lot of pages already. So I really do want to tell stories in a small amount of time because there's a lot of stuff in this series that I want to get to, and I'm not going to expect you guys to wait patiently for 10 years while I get through one batch of stories. This took 3.5 years from beginning of Chapter 5 to end of Chapter 10, which is a pretty good time frame, I think. I'm hoping I can get Phase 3 done faster, but that's another story for another day. Chapter 10 focuses on Jen Attic and her age regression. This is actually a story that I had planned to do in Phase 1. The Morty and Cass conflict would have actually been put on hold, and another student would have actually been the bad guy in Chapter 4. The very first few drafts of Chapter 4, Day of the Dork, were the dork in question wasn't actually Morty. It was this other guy who I had named Argo, who was the bad guy of Chapter 5, but that was actually a totally different character with the same name. So this kid basically just didn't like Jen, and he wanted to humiliate her the same way Morty wanted to humiliate Cass. So he's like, all right, I have this age regression formula, so I'll turn her into a baby. And the issue was about Jen de-aging, and Cass and Morty would have to team up to help her. So I abandoned that plot after a few drafts because I knew that wouldn't work at the time of Chapter 4. The readers were more invested in some closure for Cass and Morty's arc, and to throw this extra story in seemed really like a distraction from the plot that was already going on. So I took it out, and I liked the idea of turning the principal into a kid. I liked the idea of having a principal who was actually younger than all of her students. Visually anyway. Obviously mentally she's still an adult, but the idea stuck with me for a while, and I figured I'd do it now. The timing was a lot better. The fact that Jen had put together this whole ethics class with Cass and Noah and Morty and everybody in it, and the possible resentment that the student body would have for them basically controlling what they could and couldn't experiment on. And the whole situation would be prone to backlash. And I'm like, okay, this is actually the perfect time to use the age regression idea. So I made Chapter 10 all about that. So the idea for the cover, I experimented with a few things for the cover. The there were a lot of different sketches I was trying to visually show uh, Jen and the school metaphorically under attack by having the school actually like visually crumbling in the frame, or like I had an idea for like a poster of Jen on a school wall and the wall's on fire and the poster's burning up, and I'm like, that's a bit weird. I mean, Jen doesn't have posters of herself all over the place like some kind of dictator. She's not like that. So I finally figured out I could actually do a homage to the portrait of Dorian Gray, the story of a guy who remains young while a portrait of his likeness visibly ages older and older and older. So I came up with an idea for doing like a painterly style visage of Jen, and I put some like canvas texture on it. You can sort of see the canvas texture I threw in on top of the colors, and I tried to do like this airbrush. I'm not that good of a painter. So it does look kind of weird, but I wanted to have some kind of painterly thing to it. And the backdrop is, as the canvas is peeling away or dissolving, you see a breakdown of her basic genetic code, and the genetic code itself is falling apart. I sourced some images online and tweaked them, and I erased the bottom half, and I drew in the part where you see it breaking apart and falling out. So I think this actually was a pretty powerful visual. It stands in stark contrast to a lot of the other UTC covers in that it's done in such a different way. There's so much more texture to it, and there's this painterly aesthetic to it. And Jen's eyes freak me out. Some people call me out for how badly I draw people's eyes. They look kind of manic or weird or whatever. I think that's sort of the problem I have with my cartoony style, where in cartoons the characters are all very big-eyed, wide-eyed and stuff, but I'm drawing everything else more realistically and more proportionally to real human proportions, and it's kind of this weird thing. I'm going to work on that for Phase 3. I'm trying to redo my entire visual style for Phase 3, but again, that'll be covered in another commentary later on. So let's get into the issue here. The idea for the snowstorm came about because I needed to find a way. I knew how crazy things were going to get inside the school, and I wanted to make sure that not only would people not be able to escape the school, but they couldn't call in for help either and have help arrive. I wanted the story to be self-contained within the building itself. And so I'm like, okay, well, let's have a snowstorm just throw down tons and tons and tons of snow. And it was around this time that Buffalo was getting that crazy 5 to 9 foot lake effect snow over the winter of 2014 to 2015. So it was actually pretty topical to, topically inspired. I'm like, this is a real thing that could really happen. So this page was actually 3 scenes that I threw together into one page. So it's basically a giant exposition dump. Get a lot of stuff out of the way at once. I had to establish a few things. We hadn't totally seen exactly what was going on with the school. There were a few chapters in the school, the shrinking chapter and the chapter with Argo, and a part of the Ramses Steel chapter was in Gen Attic High. But the main thing that I wanted to show readers was, okay, Cass's class has actually been investigating a lot of students, and they've been reporting a lot of students for doing unethical things and irresponsible things, reckless things, endangerment and stuff like that. And so a lot of these kids were getting in trouble. And it's not just the bad guys we've seen in the previous few chapters. The ones we've seen were like obviously the biggest ones. You know, the jackals terrorizing a street on Christmas, the jackals terrorizing a street on Halloween, or Reed Steele experimenting on his brother Ramses, who was terrorizing the junior high. Those are like the really big events, but there were other things too that we haven't actually seen that have been going on in the background. And so as a result, a lot of these kids are either getting in trouble, or the parents of these kids who weren't doing anything wrong were getting worried that their kids were in danger, so they were pulling their kids out of school. So I had to have a lot of that. Like, I wish that I had more of an opportunity to really show that, but that would involve me creating one or two more chapters, and that'd be dragging along this section of the series. And I don't think the series needs to stay in this particular zone for very long. Phase 2 is, it's supposed to be a particular era in this entire series where this kind of thing is just small scale right now. But if we stayed in that part for too long, the series would feel like it's meandering, and I really wanted to avoid that at all costs, which is why you see a lot of these issues aren't actually like a status quo kind of thing, which is what I originally wanted to do at first. I wanted more chapters that were just about one kid in this school doing something crazy or evil and getting their comeuppance for it. But the stories needed to be more attention grabbing, and they needed to be more each one needed to progress the main plot further just a little bit. One major thing needed to happen in each issue to carry over to the next, and so on. And if I wrote too many of those status quo issues, it would have felt like the series was sort of running around in circles. So a lot of stuff's been going on, and we're finally establishing that properly in the series so everybody's on the same page. Parents are pulling their kids out of school, and there's a lot of possible pressure from Jen, from outside forces that are playing out on the fringes of this whole problem that we're not directly seeing. And of course there's Sinbad's documentary, which is still going on. And then we have these sinister eyes that are looking at her from the ceiling. I tried to start this issue as quickly as possible, and in the first draft of this, Jen didn't get infected for like 4 scenes. And I looked at the script, I'm like, this is going to take me 5 pages just to get to the part where things get interesting, so let's have it happen immediately. So I throw a whole bunch of exposition out, and on the next page, Jen gets injected with the age regression serum, and that's exactly what we need to see happen, and the interest is there, the plot is there. It's like, okay, this is what this chapter is going to be about. We don't know what's going on yet. The mystery will slowly unfold, but there needed to be more time for the mystery to unfold, so let's get it started right off the bat. Another thing on this page is this scene in the ethics class is a holdover from the previous chapter. I'd written a scene where Cass becomes aware of Reed Steele's cheetah serum in a scene where Jen's handing out these class assignments, and Cass just coincidentally gets handed Reed's dossier, and she connects the dots from what she already knew from Noah and Flint, and figures out the whole plot that way. And that was one of the key plot points that I removed from the last chapter, because that chapter needed to be simplified a little bit. And I liked the scene, though, because I'd written some of this dialogue with Jen and Morty that I really, really liked. This is basically Jen's revenge for Morty eating like her entire cafeteria's stock of food in the previous issue. So I felt like this is a really nice little thing to throw in, especially this opens a chapter, so things aren't really dire yet, things aren't moving really fast yet, so this is a really good place to put in some character moments. Because what is an entertaining story without character moments? And now we get some more dramatic character moments where Jen... I wanted to show that Jen is starting to actually get desperate. We're starting to see, after 10 issues, we're finally starting to see Jen cracking under pressure and starting to really doubt what she's doing here and what the students are doing. And so she's compromising on her own principles, if you'll pardon the pun. And she's actually like trying to twist Cass's arm into doing an interview for the documentary so that the school could look better, get better PR. And that's obviously not something Cass is okay with, because Cass has her own issues looking the way she does. And so it was really nice. Like, this is the first time that Cass and the principal are at odds with each other. And I forgot to color her goatee white there. Oops. So it was really, this is a really fun scene to write just because I'm not used to having these two clash on anything, and their own particular motivations are overriding their uh, ability to cooperate and be respectful to each other. So it was pretty cool. The way the scene breaks here, these pages came out once per week, so the way the scene broke with her sitting back in the chair, this is just her realizing she's gone too far. She just sits down because it's sort of just all the weight of it sort of crashed down on her, and she's just like, okay, I'm this isn't right. But a lot of people thought that maybe the injection was doing something to her at this point. It's really just her being stressed out and tired, and the emotional freight train just hitting her. That she was actually asking her most respected student to do something that she doesn't want to do. And then there's the whole arthritis thing. A couple pages back, I made sure to draw Jen actually holding her wrist so that there was some kind of visual thing. She was going to talk about her arthritis on this page, but I thought that was a bit too much of an info dump. So I didn't mention it on the page, but I still drew her cradling her wrist, showing that she actually is having a flare-up this whole day. And then it just disappears. Now we got the scene with Noah and Cass. Just every single scene in this chapter has some meaning to it and purpose, and that's how you're supposed to write, especially like for Hollywood screenplays or whatever. The general instruction is if the scene doesn't actually have a purpose in the film, if it's not driving forward the plot or presenting new information, then it doesn't have a reason to be there. And I used that very, very, very religiously on this chapter because I had a lot of scenes that just didn't matter. So I was throwing a lot of material out. I was combining a lot of scenes together into one and stuff like that. And this chapter is dealing with a lot of holdover stuff from the previous things. This is, Noah is actually starting to feel like after all this time of being really arrogant and like he's so headstrong and sure about what he's doing, and so far he's been very successful at everything he's done until the Flint incident from the last chapter, where Flint just basically stole his own invention from under his nose and transformed himself further into a squirrel. And Noah's like, okay, I enabled that and that was wrong, and I'm really worried that's going to happen again. So this is him sort of beating himself up and just trying to distance himself. And then Cass putting two and two together with the scratching of the neck thing, which Jen was doing here. And now the B plot with Flint and his dad Leon. And I'm showing more and more like this is always something I've wanted to do, and I've finally gotten to a point where this is actually like something I'm doing regularly now, which is background shots of classes show students that aren't totally human or normal looking, quote unquote. So we've got a blue skinned guy, we've got this gray cat down here. And the idea that over time, more and more of the students are becoming more open about just experimenting on themselves and just doing whatever. And sort of building the idea of this powder keg of these students are really, really messing with genetics and tampering in God's domain and, altering themselves and bringing up a lot of unspoken questions. I wanted Flint to have more dialogue in this chapter, so I retconned this thing where in the previous chapter Flint's not really talking very well in his new squirrel form, but I threw this extra blurb in here about him being able to talk again, sort of like relearning how to use his new teeth and tongue and try to talk through his ridiculous squirrel brain that's feeding him all these weird instincts and stuff. But he's got more dialogue in this chapter, and I didn't want him to just be talking like a baby the whole time with these really stilted sentences. So I threw that in. This is a friend and Patreon backer, and his student name is Walker. He's got a few appearances in this chapter. This is the first This is the first chapter to use Patreon, the Patreon reward tier, which is your cameo in the comic. And so I'm, I would love to have more opportunities. There are more opportunities, and I'd love to just start throwing anybody who wants to be in here in the issue in the background, because the school is very populated with side characters, and you can very easily have like a background thing going on. Okay, that's my plug. I'm done. So yeah, chameleon character in the comic is like I started thinking of like really very useful traits that students could give themselves to really be formidable opponents to Cass and the rest of the group of the good guys. And I'm like, well, a chameleon would actually be great, because a chameleon could like sneak around a lot and get behind people's backs and stuff, and it wouldn't make the good guys look super dumb because it's a really effective camouflage. So I was like, okay, so I'll give this. That's a pretty big power to give a character, a bad guy. But I'll throw it in, and then I'll write around it and try and figure out how to work that in. And it became very, very effective. In this next scene, she's supposed to be following them, so she's, theoretically, she's pretty much in this whole scene, but we don't see her. She could be up there right now, up on the ceiling. I really wanted to give continuity to this hallway, because this is a very storied hallway. We've seen it in Chapter 4, we've seen it in Chapters 5 and 6. And so this is the room that Karis broke out of, and the repairman's putting on a door here. It was taped up in Chapter 6, Big, Big, Big World, and now they're finally, like, completely repairing it. This is the lab where Flint and everybody got shrunk, and the lab sort of just got shrunk with them and fell onto the floor below. So this lab is out of commission because there's a giant hole in the floor and the equipment's destroyed. And this we didn't see, but apparently there was some sort of hush puppy experiment where there was a giant explosion. So there's only one working genetics lab now. And that's an issue. Contributing to the powder keg of the school, because there's a lot of students who are on edge because they don't have the facilities to finish their experiments. And also showing just how dangerous the school is becoming. Dr. Mitchell is back. It was written in Chapter 5, I Abomination, that Dr. Mitchell would recover over the course of like a couple of weeks. And it seems that he has mostly recovered. We don't know all the details yet. I don't know if I'll ever really reveal all the details for it, but he has made a almost full recovery, and he's back to teaching, obviously. Except he's got that snake tongue still, and who knows what else. But that's kind of his deal. It's really just thrown out there and not really expanded upon, because there isn't a lot of time. He's not a major character in this. Ash and 13 haven't interacted since the fundraiser in the first chapter, and I really wanted to show that Ash feels really, really strongly about his friends and protecting people, and he associates everything related to Morty as something bad. So it was this scene was very good, because it allowed me to help establish Ash's character a little bit, because we haven't really gotten to know him very well. But 13, of course, proves that her heightened feline senses are very much needed, because she's the only one who notices that there is somebody else watching. The idea for this just sort of... I didn't really know how I was going to play this out until it happened, and I'm like, well... There was actually, like, an extended scene of them talking and, like, testing Flint. And... eventually the chameleon does something to make herself noticed, but I realized, like, just having 13 in the room, if she's going to notice the chameleon, she's going to notice the chameleon just about immediately. Whether she smells her, or she sees her, or she hears her moving around up there, 13 isn't completely oblivious. So I'm like, okay, 13 would notice, like, the minute she gets into the room. So I ended up doing this thing where she doesn't just call out the chameleon the minute she gets in. There's a little bit of dialogue because of characterization and stuff that needs to happen. And then 13 brings up that the chameleon's there because her being very innocent-minded and stuff, she doesn't really think that there's any foul play going on. So it was a nice way of like, okay, the chameleon needs to be noticed earlier in the scene, but not too early to prevent all this character interaction. So it was a good like middle ground sort of thing, if that makes any sense. And this scene was, I had to put another scene in just showing that Jen has been doing this sort of thing a lot. She has these meetings with students who either get into fights or they're reported on for misconduct or unethical research or unethical experimentation or something. So this is showing that, you know, more students are mutating themselves, and Jen has been dealing with this kind of thing a lot, to the point where she's basically just like, oh, you guys can just go. If you're sorry, you can leave. You learned your lesson. And it's also showing like she's actually changing just a little bit. Some people did actually notice that her crow's feet and mouth lines, laugh lines, they're not there anymore. And again, Noah showing up here was like, when I wrote the chameleon, I'm like, well, how are they going to catch her? And I were like, well, the good guys have a wall crawler too, so why don't I have Noah show up and stop her? So this is how cool like the series has gotten for me as a writer, where there's enough crazy things happening on both sides, the good guys and the bad guys and whatever, that I can just look at what I've already established between character mutations and plot points and stuff and actually start picking out things to fix a situation that I can't otherwise figure out a resolution to. 13 and Noah really saved the day here, because otherwise they wouldn't have caught on to Kestrel being here at all. And that wouldn't have been very good for anybody. So that's, yeah, it's sort of, this chapter is where I really figured out that the UTC was finally organically developing into more of a world as opposed to just a set of stories and a set of characters, because of how things can come together without you really expecting it, or how you can struggle with trying to figure out how to make a scene work, but then look at all the other things you've already put in your arsenal and be like, okay, well actually, why don't we put this character in here and do this with it? Because that might actually fit. Just really fun stuff for a writer, where you're sort of picking your own brain and going through stuff. And this page shows something that we haven't really seen. Cass has talked about it very rarely, but we actually haven't seen Cass's senior project. She's trying to find ways to change hair color and change skin color for tattoos and other decorative purposes. So I thought it would be really nice for the readers to finally see an example of what she's actually been doing with her class project. And in this case, she's putting green triangles on lab mice. Ash and Demetrius are playing good cop, bad cop here. Dr. Vine's character is sort of, he doesn't really have much of a character. He's just this, he's one of the teachers there. So I wasn't really sure how to handle him in this. And I'm like, Dr. Vine really should be an authority in this room. He's a professor in the school, so he really shouldn't just be standing on the sidelines and watching the kids do this. He really should be taking charge of the group and telling them what really is the right thing for them to be doing. This page was pretty crazy. The original page actually had... I'm actually going to call it up, because it's a visual commentary and I can do that. So this page... Nope. This was originally much less dense. The page looked like this. And it was just the kids coming in and seeing Jen, who is a teenager like them. And the problem with this was a lot of people weren't able to really see that she was shorter, that she was younger, that her clothes didn't quite fit on her. And so the big punch of seeing her like this, it didn't hit a lot of people the way that it should have, and that was totally my fault. I should have set the scene up differently. I should have had like a visual comparison or the students standing next to her or whatever. So I my own artistic limitations prevented me from really showing this effectively, and I picked the wrong angle to do it. I picked the wrong composition. So I went back and I completely changed the page to the point where the original final panel is shrunk down into this tiny thing, which is too tiny, I admit, but and then I drew the other characters entering the room and interacting with her and being taller than her in Cass's case, and really seeing how she has changed a little bit. My own art style is not consistent. If you look at Cass, in pretty much every panel in every comic in Phase 2, she looks different. And that's something that I've been very upset about. Like, I've tried over and over again to redesign her and fix her and make sure that I draw her more consistently, but I just keep thinking that she doesn't look very good in certain panels the way I draw her normally, so I drew her a little bit differently, and that in a smaller extent is true for pretty much every other character in the comic, with the exception of, I guess, Morty, who has probably the most consistent look among everybody, which is, I don't know. So to show that Jen's eyes are slightly larger and that her body is slightly smaller, it's not enough because of the way my art style is at the time, and I'm hoping that is one of the things I will be directly correcting very quickly once we get into Phase 3. I'm going to be focusing much more on consistent character design, a unified look for everybody. Something that looks consistently good, as opposed to sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So Cass figures out, because Jen was scratching her neck, that the injection is there on her neck. And either they're dealing with one-fanged vampires or there's somebody who's going around injecting people. The camera in the first page I drew on purpose to be facing Jen and Sin so that I could throw this evidence in at the end. This evidence was originally a bit more incriminating, or at least useful to the characters, because I wanted them to really focus on having evidence, and originally Ken and Kestrel would be trying to get the evidence back, but at the point where it's like, okay, well, there's so many eyewitnesses. Kestrel was exposed to an entire lab full of students and a teacher and a parent, so it's like, just getting this piece of evidence back from the principal and having the main conflict revolve around that didn't make any sense. It wouldn't have served a purpose for the bad guys, because by the time you steal the evidence back, you've already created a mountain of other evidence that they could use in court against you. So this became more of a way for the good guys to just figure out what was going on, as opposed to create a MacGuffin for the bad guys to go to war with the good guys over. It's also a very nice way to make Sin relevant in the story for the first time ever. And of course, it had to be Ken who was there being interviewed, and Ken catches on to the fact that they're catching on to him. If I had knew that Ken would be such a big character for this, like he's supposed to be just a bad guy for this one particular story, but his role is expanding as I'm writing the chapter, and he's becoming this really big bad guy, and I wish I had established him as a character before. I didn't know it was going to get this big. If I had, I would have definitely put him somewhere in a previous chapter, just so the audience would, like, know sort of who he was beforehand, without him coming out of nowhere. Some standard development with Noah trying to reconcile what happened in the previous chapter with Leon. And Leon getting to say his piece, too. I'm still sort of feeling my way around, like, how the parents are taking this whole thing. I've been going back and forth on whether they're okay with it or whether they totally don't like it, or... and so I'm like, well, I'll just make the parents not know either, for right now. And so Leon basically is just saying, he seems happy, so it's okay, but I don't know if this is going to be bad from the long run. More cameo times. I needed a hall monitor in this. It felt really nice. I needed a student to interact with Jen that doesn't normally interact with her, like, that we haven't seen interact with her, and not know what's going on with her. So just, you know, playing with the whole, you look like a kid, so you're not the principal, so I'm going to treat you like a kid. One thing on this page I really wish I had done differently was the Jennifer Attic assuming a ridiculously well-funded private school for burgeoning scientific minds. That should have taken up all of this space. I worked too hard to make this look like a real pass, but I really should have played up the fact that the name's gigantic. Should have had a huge thing here and then had a tiny little picture, tiny little barcode and numbers. Small potatoes. This guy is actually from chapter 4, Day of the Dork. He is on Cass's team with Katsuko and a couple other extras who fight Karis with their inventions. And I wanted to use one of those characters here, working for the bad guys, to show that sometimes there's going to... None of the people in Attic High, not all of them, apply to like a black and white situation. They're not just really good or really evil. There's in-betweens, and there's people who would want to help stop a rampaging poodle monster in one day, but then another day they'll be working for somebody who has dubious motivations for other reasons. I figured as long as Kester was going to be escaping from the good guys, I should do something funny, and I haven't really messed with Demetrius yet, so I thought I'd do that, and really had just a fun moment. I wanted to use as many opportunities for just fun moments as possible in this chapter, because this chapter is pretty heavy and dramatic. So poor Demetrius gets his sweater ruined. That plot point's coming back, by the way, in the next part. Alright, they should have run in and closed the door. I was writing this, I'm like, how the heck? They know they're being followed. Why don't they run in and close the door quickly before they're jumped on? So I had them get pounced on immediately. Like, if they had, they still would have gotten stopped. I'm going to say that just for word of God right now. If they had just opened the door really quickly and run in, one of the other students would have been able to get an arm in or a foot in, or just block the door from being completely closed. So even if they had rushed into the room, it wouldn't have made a difference. But I liked this better because of they all just pounce and grab them all at once. It's a very good visual. It's very strong. And to have your heroes look like they're just like running in haphazardly, like, let's get in there really quick. It's just, it didn't really feel, it made more sense logically, but it didn't feel right for this scene. The original idea was they were going to go to a lab and scan Jen, and Cass and Morty would actually figure all this out themselves, that she's got cancer, and the cancer is actually perpetuating this special genetic strain that's making her younger. But to move the story along faster, I changed it around so that the bad guy, they would just go and try and find the super advanced confiscated student equipment that could possibly help them, including Morty's ray gun. And the bad guys just get them in the act of doing that. It makes the plot flow faster. And the bad guys were after the ray gun and all that other stuff in the first place, so it made more sense just to directly go there and then have all this come out during an action scene. This is Morty trying for redemption. In a few pages earlier, Cass says, "Morty, do us a favor." Cass was telling Morty, "We're being followed. If they get us, you need to go along with them until you see an opportunity to stop them and fix this problem." So Morty's actually not just doing what he feels is right, he's doing what Cass asked him to do off panel. And the idea here is to cheat the audience and make you think that Morty is, doing his own thing or is possibly going back to being evil. Whereas in this case, he really isn't. He's done going back to being evil. He was done with that in Day of the Dork. He had a slight backstep in terms of being evil and doing his own thing. Maybe not so much evil as just being selfish. And he had another one in Chapter 7, Terror of the Jackal, but that was more to save 13, so you could really go either way on whether that was evil or if it was just he had his own good priorities that overrode the other good priorities of saving the neighborhood. So, he's becoming more and more of a morally centered person, and this is him trying to, in some small way redeem himself for the bad things he's done in the past. So he'll go along with the bad guys, but he'll stop them later. So a fringe benefit to having this guy be on the bad guy's side is that he had his own confiscated equipment, these sonic, they're called molecular destabilizers, and even I don't know how they work, but they hurt when you use them on somebody, it hurts them. So he used these against Karis in Chapter 4, and I just happened to draw them in an establishing shot here because I figured these would be something that would be confiscated. And so when it came time for them to subdue Cass, I realized that Ken could just walk into the room, grab one, and use it. It's in the perfect spot. So that was actually a happy accident. It's nice continuity for bringing back an established invention. And it's a quick way to really show that Ken's willing to do whatever it takes to do what he needs to do. He doesn't care about hurting other people. And we're finally... I've hinted at Morty's goggles being able to see things through X-ray spectrum or whatever in the past, but this is the first time that you can directly see that, okay, Morty's goggles actually have functions. It's confirmed that they can do other stuff. In this case, he's got night vision activated. And normally they would have mopped the floor with him. He's not very good at combat, but the fact that he turns the lights off gives him a distinct advantage. His punches aren't strong enough to knock people out, but they're enough to, at least give him a temporary advantage over the situation. Unfortunately, Kestrel snuck into the room while he wasn't looking. In the previous drafts, Katsuko would actually go right to Noah and sort of run into him in the hallway, and they would all work together. But I thought it would be nice to keep them separated for now, because there's a lot of things I'd like to do in the next part, and it won't quite work if everybody is together running from location to location. I needed more people in more areas at once. So keeping them separated is a tactical move. Showing more of Jen's age regression and the fact that it's actually starting to affect her behavior now. So this whole speech was tough to write because I'm like, okay, this is a lot of words on a page, but it all needed to be said because we don't know we don't know what Ken's motivations really are until this point. Establishing the fact that, these kids are really upset that they're being handcuffed and they're really controversial experiments are being taken away, and they see themselves as an oppressed group, or at the very least, they see themselves as being disenfranchised from the very thing that they are encouraged to do, which is experiment and learn science and change the world through science. And this little box here, basically what it's doing is it's emitting a signal that's affecting anyone over the age of 25 for their pineal gland to produce, what is it, melatonin, I think it is. Extreme amounts that basically knocks them right out. Nobody's dead. They're just unconscious. I was afraid people would think they're dead. I originally had here... oh, this is the old page. How'd that happen? Boy. Yeah, this is actually not the right page. This is bad, actually. I think I sent this to press. I did. I sent this to press with the wrong page. This is Katsuko. Alright, well, this is something I wanted to talk about anyway. This is the original drawing on the page, and what happened was, when I wrote this, originally the idea was that Kestrel, instead of using this box wasn't a thing, Kestrel would have actually, before injecting Dr. Attic, she would have actually implanted a device into each of the teachers in the school that Ken would activate on his phone at this point in the story and knock out all the teachers and faculty and staff. The problem with that was that it seemed completely implausible that Kestrel would have been able to successfully implant all these things into all these people without once being detected. So I changed it to, they have a box that can basically make everyone, all the adults in the building, fall asleep. But when I wrote this, I forgot to include Leon and Sinbad in that. So on this page, Leon's not here. He's not... Flint is actually looking up at Dr. Vine, and Leon's not in the panel at all. And I drew this panel down here. And then on the next page, the original drawing for this, I had Leon here, and I had Sinbad up here, listening and conscious. And I drew the page before I realized that that was actually a continuity error, because if I wasn't just knocking out all the teachers, I'm knocking out all the adults. So what I ended up doing was I redrew this so that you saw Sinbad unconscious, because otherwise you wouldn't know what happened to him. We know that Dr. Vine was unconscious before. We saw that happen already. So I'm like, we don't need a second panel showing that he's unconscious. So I actually redrew this into Katsuko looking at an unconscious Sinbad. So I basically just pasted it right on top. And apparently, when I went to export these pages, I accidentally used the old version. So, fun trivia, the magazine version of issue 10 is going to have a bad panel. The trade paperback will not. I will have corrected this when I print the trade paperback, but yeah, that'll be a fun misprint, I guess. Because I've already ordered those books. They're on their way. Oh, man. That's embarrassing. Anyway, okay, sorry. These are major things that, like, can hang me up every so often. Like this is a really extreme example of like all the subtle changes that can go on while I'm finalizing a single page. I can write something in the script, and by the time it actually goes through the drawing and the coloring and throwing the word balloons in, it could change dramatically. Whether it's as simple as a couple of sentences being worded differently, or as extreme as extra people being added to panels. That's just that's how comics are produced. I'm just a lot of it sounds like I'm flying by the seat of my pants. It's kind of only 50% that. I have a plan, I start executing the plan, and as I'm in the middle of executing it, I find a billion different ways that I can do it better. And I try and just keep perfecting the idea as I continue finishing it. So that is a great segue into this next point, which is this issue ends on a cliffhanger, which is basically the first time we end on a real straight up cliffhanger since the very first chapter when they start when Cass and Flynn start mutating. And just the fact that Phase 2 ends on a cliffhanger is I originally it was originally my plan to end Phase 2 on a cliffhanger in the first place, but it was originally a totally different story that ended up getting moved farther off. It's going to happen later on. And I'm not saying when, but it was like, okay, this is not the right place for that story. So I created a standalone story, to end Phase 2, because thematically this wraps up a lot of stuff. This is dealing with the Attic High ethics class and all the things that have been happening in school and around the school with the students. Like, these things are coming to a head. This is a situation that's only going to get worse as more and more students experiment and as more and more inventions start becoming more and more powerful. And this chapter is all about escalation, and now we have to deal with this. We can't just keep sweeping this under the rug, or, well, actually more than that. They're actually just trying to nip things in the bud, but there's too many buds popping up all over the place that the approach of just confiscating equipment and issuing reprimands is not working anymore. It's not a long-term solution. And this ended originally, not with the whole school being incapacitated, but it originally ended with just Ken's group fighting Cass and Noah and Flint and Katsuko and 13. Like, it was just a 5-page brawl, and that's just how it ended. And as I got further and further through the issue, like, it was around when I was writing, the time I was writing these pages, I'm like, this is so dense. There are so many things that I'm setting up here. I can't end this in one issue. It would be a cop-out. It wouldn't satisfy the readers. It wouldn't address all of the things that are being addressed here. So I looked at it more and more and thought, this is a 2-part story. This has to be a 2-part story. So I started spacing out what was going on. I started really, just focusing on a scene-by-scene build-up. And so I added a few things. I added the hall monitor scene because that felt like a really good addition to the story. And I stretched out the conflict a little bit. And I made this whole speech. That speech wasn't there. He doesn't take over the school, much less use a speech. So this speech was there, and I threw in this final great cliffhanger splash page. It's not really a splash page, but whatever. And the 5 pages that I had originally written for the ending of this chapter were completely expanded into the 22-page second part that will kick off Phase 3 in the fall. So, as dense and wordy as this chapter is, I'm hoping that the conclusion will be full of action pieces, larger panels, fewer panels per page, just more kinetic energy happening, fights and running around and transformation and all that good stuff that people really, really want to see, and especially at this point, you need to see it. And so that's, without giving away any details to spoil the comic, that is basically what you can expect when UTC returns for Phase 3. There's going to be a higher emphasis on action, and things are ramping up more and more. And we're going to be directly dealing with, what Attic High has been doing, what it's been facilitating, and what the students are capable of doing, both on the side of good and on the side of evil and everywhere in between. So that's the commentary. We're just shy of an hour, so I thank you very much for listening, watching, and supporting UTC. It's been a real ride, and I'm looking forward to honing my skills and redesigning some things so that the next phase and all the phases beyond look even better than this, and continue to improve both the quality of art and quality of storytelling. I thank everybody for your support, whether you're a Patreon supporter or you donate in some other way, or you just send me an email of commenting, asking questions. There's a lot of things that UTC has improved thanks directly to fan feedback and criticism, and a lot of just directly addressing some things. And I want to thank everybody who has taken the time to write to me, comment on the comic on the website, or send me an email, or meet me at conventions. I hope to do more conventions in the future. I will announce on the UTC website where I'm going to be appearing. And I am I'm so grateful that that so many people are continuing to read this comic and continuing to enjoy it, and are spreading it around. So thank you so much, everybody, for listening. Thank you for reading. And please stay tuned to Katomics.com as I debut a brand new series that's going to be coming out during the summer of 2015, and for the return of UTC in the fall. So thank you, and I will see you later.